Everybody have their coffee? Yeah? We're going to have a nice conversation this morning. That's how I'd like to look at this. We're going to hear from the panelists, and then we're going to open it up to questions as soon as we can, because I think you'd all agree that's always where the good stuff comes in, where people get a chance to ask questions that are sometimes expected and sometimes not expected. But I wanted just to say one quick thing. David mentioned about this conference coming up in Miami that I'm doing for the Society of Environmental Journalists. If you want some information, I have some of these to hand out to you. And it's important because I think we'd all agree that, that when something gets done in society, it goes through several steps: the scientific, the political, the NGO, the activist, the advocate. But if it doesn't get picked up in the media, sometimes it has a more difficult time. And that's why this conference, which we believe will be the largest gathering, the largest environmental journalism conference ever held anywhere in the world, this October in Miami will be so important, because this issue we're going to talk about this morning and many others will be front and center. As you all know, in July of 2010, the President implemented the National Oceans Policy. He told all of his federal agencies to make it happen. It grew out of the two task forces from Pew and from the Bush White House. And the synthesized report was something that many ocean advocates had looked for many, many decades. So now where do we sit? It's on paper, but is it happening? And if not, then what's it going to take to make it happen? And that's why the four perspectives we have here today, I think, are so important. Let me just briefly introduce them to you. All know who they are already, but Senator Sheldon Whitehouse is the senator from Rhode Island. He was the Rhode Island Attorney General and U.S. Attorney, so he knows the law well, which is important. He now sits on the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, an oceans champion for his state and for the rest of the country. And he urges urgent action on climate change, one of the few senators we hear sounding the clarion call. He's also launched the Ocean Trust Fund bill, which is critical for making these kinds of things happen. But the media says he has a secret weapon, his wife, Sandra, PhD and marine biologist. So now we know where he gets all of his good lobbying efforts. True. John Weber is new to the Northeast Regional Ocean Council. He came from a similar position with Massachusetts, which in that state helped lay the groundwork for what is probably the most advanced regional council on ocean issues and marine spatial planning, California as well. Dr. Larry Robinson is the #2 guy at NOAA, the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere. I always like that title. Is it just Oceans and Atmosphere, or could you get anything else for your duties? And crucial, obviously, as we all know, the crucial federal agency in making the marine ocean policy happen. Dana Goward is with the Coast Guard. Until recently, he described himself as the air traffic controller for the oceans. But now in his new role, he oversees many of the Department of Transportation issues with regard to marine waterways. And as the Coast Guard, he plays a key role in another key agency for implementing the NOP. The operational agency is involved in so many different important areas, but is rarely the lead agency in any of those different areas. And that, in effect, is a more powerful role because they're the doer. They make things happen. So what we want to do is give each of our panelists 5 minutes to talk, to tell us what their perspective is, where we sit now, what it'll take to make things happen faster and better, and how we can save this planet. We're going to start off with Senator Whitehouse. Senator?
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming out here on a bright Washington morning. And good morning, everybody. The oceans policy, I think, was a signal executive branch achievement. But in our system of government, it's usually helpful if an executive order like that gets supported both by the power of the purse in Congress and by expanding on the purposes of the executive order in areas where an executive order can't reach, but where legislation can. And I think as you're going up and arguing, there are two things you need to do. One is you need to protect the oceans policy executive order. There is a fair amount of skepticism about it. There's a great deal of misunderstanding about it. And obviously the forces that are arrayed against it are taking advantage of and indeed fomenting that misunderstanding. So I think it's important to kind of have everybody just calm down a little bit and realize that there's nothing really nefarious here. It's really nothing more, as Sandra says, than getting everybody who's a stakeholder in the room together and having kind of an old-fashioned town hall type arrangement and assembling the factual data that everybody has gathered and layering it up so that you know how it applies to different areas of the ocean and allowing for it to be localized to a significant degree because local conditions are so different from place to place. So I think that's an important recommendation that I would make for you. Try to demystify and demonize marine spatial planning before the other side gets too far. The second thing is that we need to build on the oceans policy direction, and there is a piece of legislation, the National Endowment for the Oceans, that Senator Olympia Snowe and I have submitted. It has some very good co-sponsors. It will be assigned to the Commerce Committee, and it has Chairman Rockefeller of the Commerce Committee as an original co-sponsor. It implicates appropriations because it would create a lasting funding stream for marine science, coastal research, mitigation, restoration, and we have Chairman NOAA of the Appropriations Committee as a founding co-chairman. And then to make sure that everybody understands this isn't just a New England thing, we have Senator Stabenow, who represents the Great Lakes, which are oceans in the law books of the United States, if nowhere else, and Senator Landrieu from Louisiana to represent the Gulf Coast area. And indeed, Senator Landrieu is working very hard on a piece of legislation called the Gulf Coast Restoration Act. And that bill would take the fines and penalties that are paid as a result of the Gulf oil spill and sequester a significant portion of them for restoration in the Gulf, in the area of the spill, rather than have them simply go into the general treasury. Given the alternative for those Gulf states between having funding go to their states versus just go into the general treasury of the United States, they're a highly motivated, if disparate, group of senators. And so that appears to be coming together. And we are working with Senator Landrieu to make sure that the National Endowment for the Oceans is a part of that package. And fortunately, it appears that her bill has been sent to the Environment Public Works Committee, which I sit on. So I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure it does not emerge from the Environment Public Works Committee without the National Endowment for the Oceans attached to it. Part of the battle in Washington is to find the vehicle on which your legislation can move. Because if you can find a vehicle on which it can move, you only need 60 votes in support. If you can't find a vehicle, you need 100 votes in support, and 100 votes is very hard to find these days. So this is an important vehicle and an important opportunity. The last thing, so try to demystify marine spatial planning. Try to encourage your folks to do something national with respect to the Gulf Coast Restoration Act, and the National Endowment for the Oceans would be that national thing. And the third thing that I would say is that last week, 6 of us, 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, me, Senator Kerry, and Senator Mark Begich of Alaska on the Democratic side, and on the Republican side, Olympia Snowe, Lisa Murkowski, and Lindsey Graham, all sent out letters to our colleagues that should be on their desks when you visit them. This is Senate, not House, Senate, inviting them to join the first Senate Oceans Caucus, so that we have a vehicle for discussing oceans issues in the Senate rather than just the Commerce Committee, which tends to be focused a little bit more on the industry side. So encourage everybody, since that invitation will be sitting in their offices while you are visiting them, to go ahead and join the Senate Oceans Caucus. I think if we do that, and you have the first ever oceans policy, which the Obama administration did, you get a national endowment for the oceans that creates a lasting funding stream that can help support our awareness of the coastal issues that we're going to face and responses to them, that we have a body in the Senate that is dedicating itself to paying attention to the oceans rather than just waiting for an emergency and giving it a moment's attention, then going back to everything else. You've started to build around that oceans policy the kind of infrastructure that is important for there to be a lasting voice for oceans in Congress. So I would urge you to do that.
Great. I'm fascinated that that the Ocean Caucus has been launched, and I'm amazed it hasn't happened sooner.
There's no constituency for the oceans. Mm-hmm. There's constituencies for things that get extracted from them, but there's no constituency for them, and so this is an effort to build that constituency.
And might senators join that in order to watch out for the interests of those who extract?
Certain senators would do that for that very purpose. And they're just as welcome, because we need to work together to get this done. If it serves to educate them to the broader issues, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. John Weber, you're next.
Thank you, and thank you to David and to you and to everybody else for organizing this. It's a very important moment. The Senator, you're always very tough to follow your remarks, so thank you for your remarks. When I spoke to David about participating on this panel, one of the things that I said is I thought that in the Northeast, I worked for the Northeast Regional Ocean Council, states from Connecticut to Maine and federal counterparts organization, said I thought we had a story to tell. And that was part of my, and it's a story that has not certainly ended, so it's an ongoing story. And then as I was thinking about this, I thought, okay, so a story to tell, what better way to do that than to try to draw a metaphor? Metaphors are great. And I started thinking about, for some reason, movies as metaphor. So I started thinking about what sort of movie could be a metaphor for what we've done in the Northeast. And you know, in the Northeast, I think one of the reasons why we have been so successful is we have such a strong world-class science base to draw from. Folks at the University of Rhode Island who have been involved in Rhode Island's Ocean SAMP, Special Area Management Plan. Certainly Woods Hole, MIT, other places. So I thought, okay, so you know, it's got to be a movie with a science aspect to it. Certainly in the Northeast, we also have a willingness to take on tough conversations. Sometimes we maybe go looking for tough conversations or conversations and try to make them tough. But we certainly do have that willingness to do that, and I think that's one of the reasons why the Massachusetts and Rhode Island efforts and Maine efforts as well are sort of leading the way in some regards, because we've taken on those tough conversations. So I thought, okay, so you've got science and you've got tough conversations and you've got, you know, a group certainly of core folks who have been leaders in all of this, and I thought, okay, small group of core leaders plus science plus willingness to take on conversations, that equals Star Wars. So I thought, you know, because you remember you had a band of rebels, right? And you had, you know, science, and it was kind of science fiction, and I'm dating myself at the time, but, you know, in the 70s, you know, that was pretty advanced stuff, and they were doing, you know, they were taking on tough battles and all that good stuff. And so I raised this with my wife, who's my touchstone on these sorts of things, and she sort of gave me a look and she said, well, John, you know, I love you, and you are in no way Han Solo. You just are not. So I thought, okay, maybe I'll try a different tack. So I started asking her about, you know, other movies that she liked, and the first one that she mentioned was Titanic. I thought, well, you know, that's maybe not quite the message that we're trying to get across, although it's interesting because it has a shipping angle, I suppose. But, you know, maybe that's not quite it. And so we started, my wife, after listening to me fumble around with this for a couple of minutes, she asked me kindly to please stop. So I'm not going to belabor that point. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm sure folks are happy to hear me say that I'm not going to try to belabor the point. Here's what I want to say. We do have a story to tell. The National Ocean Policy declares, I think, has some very sensible aspects to it. It recognizes that a lot of human activity and certainly a lot of what we value in the ocean does not care about these jurisdictional lines that we have set up between states and federal folks and things like that. It is very sensible then that I think that there is meant to be very precisely a regional look at this. As the Senator said, There is certainly a lot of nefarious talk going on about what CMSP means. In the Northeast, I think that what we have recognized through both work at the state level and also work at the regional level is that what CMSP is about, I will boil it down to, is a couple of main things. It's about bringing together the best available science and data that we have and thinking about that holistically. And that is new, and we all know that. The second thing it is about bringing together people, including those folks who we may not agree with, bringing them early into the conversation. So those two key points are, I think, what the Rhode Island effort and the Massachusetts effort, through focusing on those two, it is one of the reasons why they've been a success. There are other regional councils that have been active for some time. We all know this. The West Coast has been particularly active. Others are spinning up. In the Northeast, NROC, the Northeast Regional Council, for which I work, has really to date been a forum to bring together states and federal partners. Think of just the power of that. The fact that we are able to come together to discuss common issues, and there are many. So we have been essentially doing some of this work already, and we are poised to go the next step to actually begin implementing those portions of the National Ocean Policy. We have, as an example, we have at NROC, we have had work groups and work plans. They have been organized around things like ecosystem health and energy. So obvious, very timely, topical issues. And honestly, I think we see this whole CMSP effort as really a way to advance the region's goals. We are pleased to note that it appears that in our conversations with the National Ocean Council folks and CEQ that it looks like there's going to be a two-way communication there as we develop our work and work with folks here. And we're very pleased to hear that. Obviously, in New England, there have been states that have been dabbling with this stuff. I've alluded to that. That is also a strength that we bring to bear. We have worked and have some very successful examples of how to do this CMSP. And I think coming out of that, one thing that we do need to do more is that we need to, demystify this, demonize this to an extent. And I think we can do that based on what we've seen in the Northeast. We fully recognize that there is more to come on this. One of the things that is most interesting to me is how much this keeps me awake at night, trying to figure out what in the end this may look at. But realizing that it's going to take all of us to pull this off, there's comfort in that. So I think with that, I will halt and look forward to being part of this great panel and part of the conversation moving ahead.
John, yes or no answer, if you could. Are other regional councils calling your office to try to get up to speed faster because of the advances you've made?
Yes.
That's a good news. Dr. Robinson, go ahead.
No. Good morning, everyone, and I want to thank David and you, Jeff, for moderating this session and for having a vision to get behind this effort to help in the preservation, the conservation of our oceans, coast, and Great Lakes. I just want to do two things this morning. The first is to just give you sort of an update on where we are with regard to the policy since the anniversary of its signing on July the 19th. And talk to you about some additional ways that you might get involved. But let me first follow up on this theme of demystifying, because one of the things we recognized last year, and I also want to point out that you all note that the President signed this executive order right while we were in the midst of Deepwater Horizon. It was just as important to move forward with this initiative, although we were in the midst of one of the worst environmental crises in our nation's history. So keep that context in mind. So as we were dealing with that issue and going around the country, one of the things we heard were a number of questions about what is this National Ocean Policy and what does it mean to me. So one of the first things we did is organize a series of so-called trips of opportunities where NOAA, along with several of our other federal partners, Coast Guard, Navy, in particular, organized a series of sessions around the country with different leaders in our organization as well as the other federal agencies, talk to citizens around the country about what this really meant. And the more we held those, the more we recognized that this need to demystify what CMSP is in particular, but how this whole initiative is going to work was fairly significant. So actually at NOAA, and I'm going to go back and forth between what the National Ocean Council and what NOAA does, and I feel fairly free to do so since I'm here on behalf of NOAA, is that we actually have our Science Advisory Board taking a look at coastal marine spatial planning to see if that collection of very smart people can help us with how we present this to the public. And we just heard from them a week or so ago, and they have some fairly good ideas that we're going to adopt once that report is finalized at the July meeting of that body. So we've gone beyond our own thoughts, but we're listening to others about how this might be done. The first meeting of the National Ocean Council itself, the principles took place in November of last year, and that really started the clock ticking on a number of milestones that were specified in the National Ocean Policy. Among those things included the establishment of the Governance Coordinating Council, which, as you know, is only one of two non-federal entities that report directly to the National Ocean Council. That group was approved by the National Ocean Council's principals in January or February of this year. They had their first meeting here in Washington in March. And it's very important that for us all to be aware of that group as well as think about what we need to do here in Washington, because one of the principles to the policy that really is necessary for its success is that sort of grassroots, bottoms-up approach to implementation. If we don't get that type of input, then this becomes another Washington, D.C. initiative that will fail. So I would like to advise you to pay attention to the representatives from states, local governments, and tribes who have been selected around the country so that you can provide your input to those individuals as well. The only other group that citizens group, non-federal entity that reports directly to the NOC is ORAP, the Oceans Research and Resources Advisory Panel that I had the privilege of serving on prior to this nomination. So it just so happens that this is a good time to be having this meeting because June next month is a very busy time frame for the National Ocean Policy. As all of you know, the policy itself is is framed by 9 priority objectives. And for each of those objectives, there are plans to develop what are called strategic action plans. And those processes are underway, and it's an important opportunity for you and others to provide input into this process. The strategic action plan really is the implementation mechanism for the National Ocean Policy. This is where how we do it is going to be articulated to citizens and others all around the country. The outlines of those strategic action plans are going to be placed on the White House website in June for review. But furthermore, we are arranging a series of listening sessions around the country in June that you will have an opportunity to shape what's actually in these strategic action plans, helping to ensure that they actually make sense. We're going to post next week on the Department of Interior's website the actual locations of where these meetings will be held around the country, and I strongly encourage your participation. It was also specified in the National Ocean Policy that we convene a national workshop on coastal marine spatial planning. And I'm happy to announce that on June the 21st, you and others around the country will have an opportunity to participate in this workshop that's going to be held here in Washington, D.C. And I want to, once again, strongly encourage your participation, but I want to point out to you that there is limited space because of resources, but I suggest that you act quickly if you haven't already in terms of signing up for that workshop. Another important part in terms of what NOAA and going back to NOAA again, have been planning with regard to the implementation of coastal marine spatial planning. I'm sure many of you know that we had in the president's budget for FY11 $20 million that constituted a federal funding opportunity to support two types of initiatives on coastal marine spatial planning. One was sort of helping entities around the country get organized, and then for those that were fairly organized, there was another pocket of that $20 million for actually taking some actions regarding coastal marine spatial planning. We won't be able to do that. However, we're looking at NOAA how we might be able to do some things on a smaller scale. We'd also, separate from the $20 million in the president's budget, there was $6.7 million to allow us to organize ourselves internally for coastal marine spatial planning. In the absence of that, we actually have established a coastal marine planning office at NOAA that's housed in the National Ocean Service, and the acting director of that is Jennifer Lukens, if you would like to contact her. So anyway, these activities, I think, are critical to the success of the plan. It is, they will allow for this continued grassroots input into the National Ocean Policy, which we believe without the policy will not be successful. So I encourage your continued participation in activities like these, as well as in those specific activities designed to get input into what the implementation of the policy is really going to look like. Thank you very much.
Very quickly, Doctor, I think you could widely view NOAA as one of, if not the lead agency on NOP. Would you say that other agencies are not as enthusiastic about it, and is that frustrating?
No, I wouldn't say that. I've had the privilege of working with some very enthusiastic agencies. Now, maybe I haven't seen the ones who are unenthusiastic, but obviously our stake and role on behalf of the citizens of this country in the oceans might be a bit more, significant than other agencies. And so, I might be a bit biased, so you're probably asking the wrong person. But I would tell you this, that I haven't had a problem, for example, when we endeavor to organize these regional sort of informal sessions on the National Ocean Policy. When we asked Coast Guard, when we asked Navy, when we asked other agencies, they were there, okay? And that was very helpful.
Dana Goward.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, David, for the invitation, for organizing this, and thank you all for being here. I have to say it's very nice to be here with you today. I felt confident in scheduling myself to be here because as a federal bureaucrat, I was pretty sure that even if there was a rapture last night, that I would still be able to be here with you this morning. So, another reason that it's good to be here with you is that I spent the first 30 years of my career on active duty, and as a junior officer, right out of the academy, I was on a patrol vessel in the North Atlantic, and that duty involved being a witness and being forced to stand by and watch as the rape of the North Atlantic occurred. I stood there, this was in the days of the 3-mile limit, and I stood there and I watched as fishing vessels from all over the world hauled back 500 tons apiece at a time, multiple times a day, saying to myself that even though I didn't have a background in marine biology, this cannot be good. And of course, as we all know, it ended up in the destruction of an ecosystem and destruction of a way of life and an industry in the Northeast. And as a result of that, we eventually came around to the exclusive economic zone, otherwise known as the 200-mile limit. But of course, by the time that was in place, to protect something, that something was no longer there. Probably one of the great tragedies and unrecognized tragedies of American maritime history. But I think what that taught me was that we have a problem with commons as people. And we see this in cyberspace, we see this in outer space, and we certainly see it in water space. And that is, if something is owned by everybody, it is exploited by many but cared for by few. And that in a commons you have a substantial problem with governance. And we continue to have that problem in the U.S. federal government today. There are over 20 federal agencies and departments that have some portion of regulating and being responsible for different maritime activities and different facets of the oceans. And when you add on to that different state agencies, localities, counties, cities, ports authorities, and private individuals and commercial concerns that have some portion for governing, caring for, and using our water space, you get something that is splintered at best, fractured into thousands of pieces at worst, and you wonder how we can ever get anything done in terms of a coherent approach towards our precious maritime resources. So I think the U.S. Coast Guard, as Jeff mentioned, is fairly unique in that we have, as he mentioned, fairly broad authorities and responsibilities for executing the nation's interest in maritime. In fact, we've been called the nation's maritime Swiss Army knife. You know, if there's something that's wet, we probably have some interest in it, and even if we don't have a majority stakeholder, we have some interest and responsibility in having it go well. Certainly, we have very broad responsibilities and authorities across the safety, security, and stewardship frame of maritime. And if it happens, and another thing that we have, another thing that we bring to the table is that we're out there every day. We're on the water, we're in the ports, we're along the coast, where a great majority of human interaction takes place, and so we witness things, not only things like the exploitation of the fisheries resources far offshore, but more mundane and perhaps even more impactful things like accumulations of minor oil spills in our harbors and along our coast, and we see the impacts. Our diverse roles, the fact that we're actually on scene also, we are told, gives us a degree of credibility as an arbiter between competing factions and competing interests in maritime. And so we feel very privileged to often play that role and be able to participate as a credible authority and a credible actor who's looking out for a balance of interest and a balance of uses in maritime. But of course, I think in keeping with that, because we are out there and we see that, we understand that compatible uses have to be based upon environmentally sustainable practices. If the oceans are key to life here on Earth, and if we destroy them or significantly degrade them, it's not going to be in anyone's long-term interest, in spite of the fact that many people are oriented towards short-term gain. Building on that, I think we also bring a perspective to the table that just up from environmental sustainability and preservation is safety of navigation. And safety of navigation is very, very much of a fundamental thing, because there are so many things that flow from not having safe navigation. Environmental degradation, economic loss of life, loss of property, and a whole series of things that cascade if you don't have safe operations. That's, of course, one of the hallmarks of Coast Guard roles and responsibilities, and in fact is the principal pillar within my portfolio. So as the National Ocean Policy is bringing greater coherence to governance to maritime, it can't help but make things in the long term easier for us in the U.S. Coast Guard. And I think I wouldn't be a federal bureaucrat if I didn't bring some PowerPoint slides. So I have 3 of them for you today, if we could call them up there. The first one is just a cover slide that gives you an impression. I think you all know about the U.S. Coast Guard and our roles and various interests across the maritime spectrum. The one just before that, if you would. Oh, there we go. I think the first step in greater coherence in maritime governance, the things that the National Ocean Council has done, is to establish, is to draw a map. There are many people who believe that because we are corporeal beings and we exist within a geospatial frame, that most everything starts with a map. And this is one of the great organizing principles of the National Ocean Policy and the National Ocean Council, is to designate places, real places on the Earth where real people have real authority to make real decisions and coordinate real things that are going to go on. And Jeff, we had a question as to whether or not Florida, yes, Florida is in 2 zones, as you can see. And even though, so Florida gets to play twice in 2 regional councils. While this is going to be certainly a significant additional effort for Coast Guard above and beyond what we are already tasked with and stretched fairly thin across the spectrum. This is something that we are committed to engaging in and being involved in absolutely at every step, and partnering with our friends in NOAA to ensure that all the various players in all the various regions come together as much as possible to coordinate their activities. One example of what can happen when that doesn't happen, if you go to the next and last slide, you can see right here, and this was a project that was initiated just before we really kicked off coastal marine spatial planning, and it's a desire to put wind farms off the Atlantic coast. And as you can see right here, we have 3 wind farm areas that were proposed and plotted out and advertised in the Federal Register. But when we in Coast Guard overlaid the patterns of maritime traffic onto the proposed wind areas, you can see that 2 of the wind areas were relatively well thought out in advance. And as they say in Sesame Street, one of these things is not like the other. The third, the southern one, was going to have challenge with the large volume of petrochemical traffic that moved into and out of Delaware Bay, the largest oil and petrochemical concentration of facilities on the Atlantic coast. So I'm glad to say that we've sorted that out. We look forward to coastal marine spatial planning and the National Ocean Council processes so that we can get ahead of these things even earlier in the process henceforth.
Dana, a very quick question before we go to questions for the others. Is the Coast Guard concerned about any additional costs that are incurred with additional duties, or do you find it to be perhaps a streamlining effect?
Well, we're always concerned with additional costs and additional duties. As I think many of you know, we are stretched fairly thin across a wide range of activities. We, under law, have 11 statutory missions, but even within my one portfolio, I have 10 different functional programs that are very disparate from each other, and we have a challenge keeping up with them all at the same time. However, this is one of those issues that we cannot ignore, we cannot not participate in fully, so we are going to do our utmost to prioritize our efforts and support this to the utmost.